And now it's time to welcome Trip Kucera, who is Vice President of Client Success and CMO in Residence at Harte Data and Content Solutions Group. Trip is going to teach us more about the content continuum. Take it away, Trip.
Thank you. Still morning. Good morning. So before I get into my content, no injuries on my watch, please. Did you sign the waiver?
I'm so excited to be here.
Awesome. I'm excited to have you here. So first, thanks to Andrew and to the whole Demand Gen Report team for putting on this event. I think it clearly the success is evident. It really fills, I think, an important void that was in the market in terms of how to kind of take a lot of the conversations happening about content marketing and put that into practice. And certainly I aim to contribute to that effort with my talk today. I'm going to be talking about this idea of a content continuum. It was really gratifying to hear Brent up here earlier. I think I remember reading the Challenger sale back in 2011 and starting to think about what impact that had for marketers back then, and have been talking a lot about the hidden sales cycle. Some of you, I spoke a lot about that last year, and so some of you may have heard that. I'm going to retouch on that, but bring that a little further and talk about this idea of a content continuum and how content is fitting in and mapping to our demand gen challenges. And so I'm from Aberdeen. Well, I'm from Harte, which also owns, if you will, Aberdeen Group as a research brand, a research publishing brand, and we provide marketing, content-driven marketing services on top of that research. So I both contribute to the research channel and our marketing channel as a primary analyst, but also work a lot with our clients who are absorbing and using our content marketing services and research-driven content to help them map how to use that content into their buyer's journey. And so this presentation and this research kind of comes from both of those angles. Let's see here. Anybody pass through one of these today on their way here? So the notion of value probably didn't occur to you when you were going through a toll booth, probably because we're compelled to give up value for what is often seen as questionable return. And no, this is not a Chris Christie joke. So I was tempted, but I didn't go there. I think this notion of a toll gate or a toll booth is kind of interesting to think about in the context of demand gen and then in the context of content. If we think about our buyers on this path, on their decision journey, really needing to reach certain gate stages in their journey. And we often, from marketing context, think of this in terms of our demand funnel. So we think of it as a marketing inquiry, marketing qualified leads, sales accepted leads, so forth. So if we think about those as these gate stages that our buyers are going through, at each one of these, I think it's interesting to think about a notion of value exchange that needs to happen. And the value we get from buyers is often information. It's information explicitly, who they are, their demographics, their firmographics, and so forth. But probably more valuable, and we talk a lot about the implicit information they're giving us by consuming content, by interacting, the signals we're often thinking about it. But what's the value we're providing to the buyer in this instance? Well, I would argue that content is a big part of that. It is the currency, if you will, of that exchange from our perspective, from the buyer's perspective, what they're getting to move forward on this path. And so if we think about that, it has some implications for the way we think about the content that we're using at each of those gate stages and what it needs to do for us. So before I go forward, I have there's a brief video that we want to show. Don't show it quite yet. So this is from a well-known kind of marketing sage, really, and it really exemplifies the importance of the value exchange that's happening, and really what's happening in the context of this modern B2B buyer's journey and the empowered customer. So you can roll that now. I hope you can roll that now. Because otherwise I'm going to have to act it out, and that would be really ugly. I can move past it if we're not going to have luck with that, but keep going? Okay. All right, well, at any rate, any Monty Python fans? I'm not going to try a British accent. Monty Python fans might remember that great scene where our knights approach the bridge, and the bridge of death. And they have to answer questions 3. Things like, what's your favorite color, what's your name, and what is the flight speed of a swallow? And King Arthur famously returns with his question back to the gatekeeper, with his question back. European or African? Swallow, that is. It works better as a video.
You did a good job, though.
Thank you. So at risk of getting cast into gorge of eternal content marketing peril, I'll continue here. So let's talk a little bit about the value exchange that we're going to go through today here. I'll talk a little bit about a framework. I think it's one that's complementary to kind of the concepts in Challenger. And as I mentioned, I've been thinking about kind of the marketing implications of Challenger sale for a couple years, and I'm really liking how they're kind of developing that out from the Challenger marketing perspective. And so I don't think this is contradictory at all. It's maybe a little bit of a different take. And can be valuable that way. I'll look at and beyond kind of the assets, and by that I mean a framework for thinking about content and content types that isn't necessarily asset specific, but I do have some research and some data on kind of asset preferences at various stages. And then tons of data. We're Aberdeen Group. We do primary research. Let me talk a little bit about that. We do primary research with folks like you, with end users, with practitioners in the market. So we do a ton of survey-based research. And then we have this methodology for kind of crunching that data that's basically a performance benchmark methodology. So we'll take a couple of the key performance indicators that we track in the study. We'll score the respondents, and then we'll look at that from a performance cohort perspective. So best in class, industry average, and laggards. And what we're doing is we're looking for correlation. So it's correlation, not causation. And so you'll see some slides come up where I present, here's what best in class are doing versus industry average and laggards. And you see these, and I do that to show these nice correlations or absence of correlation, right? And it's kind of like getting to, look over the shoulder of the smartest kids in class, kind of see how they organize their notebook and so forth. And we look at that from the perspective, as you'd imagine, what's driving their strategy, what's driving their concerns, what are their strategic initiatives that they're focused on, and then how are they executing across people, process, technology, and then of course their performance. So we'll through this, I have data from kind of 2 primary research studies that we did. One on content marketing, which is a study we kind of had running all last year. I presented some very early findings from that study at this event last year. And so some of the data kind of rounds that out with a larger sample size. And then a new study that we've just done and we're starting to publish out of on demand gen and marketing automation. So we're looking kind of the content angle that's in both of those. So a little bit about me. I'm a B2B marketing guy. And I already mentioned I have this interesting and an awesome role where I contribute to our marketing research, but also work a lot with our clients. So Aberdeen Group is our research brand. Harte is our commercial brand. And you may have seen we have a standout here. We've been supporting this event now for 2 years, and we build content marketing services on top of the research. So it's research-driven content. To help with some of that disruption that Brent was talking about. So a little bit of today's road, we're going to kind of go quickly and talk about this idea of the content continuum. So, I touched on that with this idea of these gate stages and how content needs to play throughout that. One thing I think is often lost is the last mile of content marketing between marketing and sales and the continuation of that conversation. And I won't ask for a raise of hands, but I'm sure many of you have gotten one of those calls or one of those emails. Hey, I noticed that, ... If you're doing that, just get rid of it right now. No, I noticed that you downloaded whatever, or you stopped by the booth. Your buyer probably doesn't remember. Anyway, I'll come back to that. And I'm going to recap this idea of a hidden sales cycle. I think in the context of challenger sale and challenger marketing, this is going to start feeling very familiar. I have I think a parallel but slightly different take on it. And then this was kind of mentioned at the beginning of the conference. I want to touch on this idea of content competition and what the implications are for your content marketing strategy in this world where content competition is so fierce. And then I'll get into this idea of aligning around the buyer's question and so representing each of those gate stages as a buyer's question as a way of thinking about your buyer's kind of frame of mind as they're on this journey, as well as how your content is acting as the answer to that question. Lots of stats, and I'll end with some recommendations. So I'll revisit this idea of the hidden sales cycle. This is up till about there. This is like the arrow, on Brent's thing. This is a depiction I sometimes use to think about this. If you think about the vertical axis roughly as kind of control and visibility, control of message and visibility into the interactions. And your ability, as you are up here in the orange, your ability as a marketer to control what's happening in the information flow and to have visibility on what buyers are consuming and doing is limited in the early going. But it's limited for your the words got a little messed up here. But it's limited for your competitors. And so this middle area is this frictionless access to content and community where your buyers are doing all of this education, all of this learning. And I think this is really what has driven, a dynamic that has driven content marketing and has got us where we are today. And so I think it's helpful to think about these questions that are the buyer is experiencing along this path. What's my problem? How do I solve it? What are the tools I need for success? How do I de-risk this? And I'll get more into those in a minute. And it's marketing's imperative to put that vision-shaping content in the path of the buyer. And so these things come together and start to paint this picture of how to organize and think about your content marketing strategy around these key questions, maybe the killer questions. So just as proof that kind of content today is demand gen, this is data from our demand gen study, so it's not specific to content marketing. And these are the pressures. We ask folks about 10 different pressures or that are kind of impacting their strategy and their approach to demand gen today. Kind of what's on their mind, what's bugging them. The top pressure reported was this need for compelling content that's going to move the buyer, that's going to answer their question. And then we see this. This is one of those 95% stats. Except it's 80%. I've seen as high as, I think CMI's number is 93 or something percent in terms of percent of companies that have a content marketing initiative in place. This is actually all companies. The data you're going to see a little later on might break down just the B2B folks. So this is across B2B and B2C. It's weighted about 60% B2B. But you see about 80% of the companies have a content marketing initiative in place. That number, the robust content marketing program in place, we've actually seen that grow even since the beginning of 2013. The beginning of 2013, that number was in the teens, so it was about 16% at that time. So we've seen that grow over that time. So more folks are moving on up. But interestingly, we haven't seen kind of the total percent of companies that have the initiative in place grow all that much. So right, in a world where 80% of your competitors are doing content marketing isn't differentiating. And so what we get is a dynamic where this is kind of stating the obvious, right? The availability of attention is far surpassed by the availability of content that is fighting for that attention. And so, that really creates this content competition. Some folks are calling this notion kind of content shock. I think that's an interesting, I like that as it's a shocking statement. It feels a little zero-sum, perhaps, because I think there's always an opportunity to fight for this attention and to win this attention. And there was one tweet, and I didn't put it out. I forget who did, but it was awesome. I thought it was a great line. The challenge isn't content shock; it's content schlock. I think about that in the context of how do we fight against this, right? How do we compete in this world of content competition? So I'm thinking about it in the context of these 3 Fs, and we can debate exactly whether these are the right terms for them, but it's a convenient framework right now. First of all, it has to be fine, right? It has to be beautiful. It has to look good, and so that's kind of this, I think, first hurdle. I put this into one of the elements that is necessary but not sufficient. Second, there has to be fit. So it has to have utility, and this goes to the building the buyer's vision. This goes to content that is going to start challenging the buyer, that is going to start making the buyer a mental user of your product or your solution, and really move them towards action. I think this one is both necessary and sufficient. And then findable. I won't spend a lot of time, much time on this. I think there's a notion that being there is 90% of success. Again, this is a necessary but not sufficient element to my mind. But this is also, I think we can think about this in the context of right content at the right moment for the right buyer. So there's a little overlap with fit. And I'm not an SEO expert by any means, so I think there's better folks that can address and talk about the notion of findability from a content perspective. And ultimately, my bias is for the second, as you probably heard, right? I think it's both necessary and it's necessary to have fit in order to fight in this world of content competition. Why is that? Why is that a source of differentiation? Well, I think you can build beautiful content. You can find folks that can help you build beautiful content. But again, necessary but not sufficient. That's a rentable capability in my mind. I think you can build capabilities around findability, but I also think that the long-term trend is that Google is trying to make it easier for us to find content that's relevant. And if we're doing the right things from a content perspective, findability hopefully will become easier. In the meantime, pay attention to the folks that are really knowledgeable SEO and so forth in terms of speaking in terms of findability. But ultimately, it's fit. It's about aligning to the information needs of the buyer, and doing that in a way that creates a bias for your products and solutions. You're uniquely capable. You are that unique snowflake that has the knowledge of your customers, your product, your solution, how folks are using it, how folks are finding value and getting ROI out of your products. And now your job is to tell that story. So how do you achieve fit? Well, it's not easy. So this is some data from that demand gen report that I mentioned. In our studies, and you'll see a couple examples of this coming up, we often look at kind of two factors. One is we'll have folks, respondents, rate the perception of value of a certain capability or a certain activity, and we'll have them rate their ability to execute on that, and both on a 1 to 5 scale. And then we typically look at the 4s and 5s in each of those to kind of get this sense of what do folks say is really, really important, and what do folks say that they're really effective at being able to execute on. So we do that, and we compare these two things, and we see this gap emerge, right? And again, consistent with the top-line pressure that I showed earlier, relevant, compelling content, big gap, right? Everyone says it's really important, but it's not super easy. Best in class are better at it, though, and so we can see this nice correlation between best in class performance and high effectiveness around content. This might be a little bit of an eye chart. Another gap analysis here where we're looking, this is from the content marketing study, just B2B. Again, you see this gap between producing high quality content, generating sufficient content, and then down here we're at a content to conversion conference, and the gap is startling between tracking, being able to track content conversion metrics. And again, I look at that same data from a best-in-class perspective. This is looking at the percentage of respondents who rate high effectiveness, so the 4s or 5s. And we see, again, best-in-class pretty consistently more likely to be effective in some of these critical areas. Interestingly, down here on the bottom, we don't see best-in-class out ahead on generating sufficient content to meet our needs. But the much higher on producing high-quality content. So it's interesting to see that gap between where best-in-class companies are, and to me, it tells a couple things. One is they've really focused clearly on content quality. So it goes back to that, I think that thing Andrew was saying at the opening. Kind of say things shorter, but be more impactful. I don't think I got the quote quite right, but that's the notion. And then maybe now they're starting to figure out how to scale quality. And quality, I think, goes back to fit, right? Quality is, sure, it's beautiful, but quality really is about, is it doing the job? Is it answering my buyer's critical questions? Speaking of fit, this is some really consistent data where best-in-class companies are more likely to align their content to a variety of factors. So certainly the buyer persona, and I think there's some other talks coming up where there's great discussions around kind of mapping to buyer personas and building those out. So clearly, you can see the numbers are really high for best-in-class companies in terms of aligning content to buyer persona, aligning content to the buyer stage, aligning content to industry, and then also an important one here, and I'll come back on it, but the idea that content marketing efforts are well aligned with the sales methodology, whether that's something like Challenger, whether that's something like a solution selling methodology or a whiteboard selling methodology, whatever it might be, that as a marketing team, you're building out content and building a plan to maintain the content continuum from marketing to sales. And you can see best-in-class much more likely to be thinking in these terms. So what's the question? What are these questions? Well, in honor of 24 coming back on the air, no spoilers, I haven't seen it yet, Steve Udard. I built up a couple dossiers for you of the critical questions that our buyers have at each of these moments. All right, so The buyer stage is discovery. The critical questions here, this is early on, right? What don't I know? How can I be more successful at work? How can I get a raise, get a promotion, do something interesting with my career, be helpful to my company, not get fired? Probably not that one. Maybe that one. What do I need to do to be more competitive? And the content here, it's vision forming, it's challenging a status quo, it's benchmarking performance at a high level perhaps. Generally shorter form. We need to earn the attention of the buyer, at this stage. Even though I say I don't want to necessarily focus on assets, I do have some data that I'll contradict myself immediately and say I do have some data that talks about kind of asset use at this stage from a couple perspectives. So we'll say, of course, that your mileage is going to vary around use of these assets. You may find that a particular asset, it's maybe low on the rankings, but you've figured out a way to use it really effectively in a certain moment, and power to you. I think that's why we need to always be measuring and getting great content analytics so we can understand that something may actually be a kind of a counterintuitive content play. But anyway, caveats done. So this is some of the content usage data that we have from the study. So this is ungated website content. One of the things you'll see really consistently in all of this that on the ungated video is really huge right now. The show opened with video. Video is really taking off. It's one of the across the board kind of most used asset types that we're seeing. Again, you see video up here. This is social channels, third-party research, and our company-authored white papers. Actually surprised to see it so high there, but I think this is what folks are out there kind of using this content in their social channels. And their blog, again, video up on top, company-authored white papers, third-party curated content, all amongst the top three here. And here we start to see infographics kind of break out from a performance perspective. All right, so let's move on to the next, which is the consideration phase. So folks have kind of they've gotten a notion of that there's a problem they have in their business. They have their sights on something. So now the question is, what problem should I solve first? What should I prioritize? How do I solve this problem? Which capabilities are important for me? This is still, I think, largely a marketing play. I think that when I go to the next, it's that transition to sales. So capabilities and best practices. Here, the buyer. Brent talked about that mental model. I like that notion. The buyer becomes a mental user of your product or service. So they start to build that vision for how great it's going to be when they've solved this problem, and they start counting the raise that they're going to get. And longer form content emerges here, and we're starting to earn the attention, the right from our buyers to engage them in something a little bit deeper. And the content really lends itself to it, right? If you're going to talk about capabilities and best practices, it's hard to do that just with an infographic or a video. You kind of have to start to get a little bit deeper. And this is some of the metrics we have around use of content. You can see the top three here: third-party research, company-authored white papers, and online assessments, ROI calculators, tools like that someone starts to dig a little bit deeper in terms of what the impact is going to be for their business. So a couple words here, because we're about to kind of transition over and look at kind of more of the sales-oriented stages of this. This is some data from that demand gen study, looking at lead nurturing capabilities. In a minute, I'll have one on lead scoring. And you can see the way that content is really playing a critical role here. Certainly, lead nurturing perspective, content is it's the stuff you're using, right? But for best in class, they're much more likely to also be thinking about the signals and thinking about how that's going to impact the journey that buyer is on, the information journey. And so they're more dynamic in the way that they're building their nurture programs with a little bit more logic built in there, not just a pre-programmed flight that might have an on or off based on some trigger, but kind of that ongoing dialogue, that ongoing conversation that's adjusted as we go, and that we're learning from the buyer maybe what their next question is going to be based on what the answer we just gave them. And then again, from a scoring perspective, we see best in class more likely to be really combining a notion of a demographic and firmographic information with behavioral data. So those signals that they're generating through interaction with the content. So the next two stages, just looking at time here, are evaluation. So here the question is really who's going to help me with this? You know, who are the leaders? How can I reduce risk? How can I maximize my ROI? You know, the inertia is maybe one of the biggest competitors here. Kind of not doing anything because the risk of doing something new, there's always risk in doing something new. There's risk that it's not going to work, that we're not going to return our investment, and that we're going to get demoted and fired and wind up in a van down by the river, right? So the content here is solution-centric, a little bit more ROI. Again, risk of doing nothing perceived as higher than the risk of action. And then final stage here of selection. And I think this is about kind of pre-buyer's remorse. How will I succeed? Are we making the right choice? I think here you start to see some interesting things happening in the customer success space with programs that are really designed. Now, those are generally designed for after sale, but I think there's a notion of content that has that element of customer success that is, you know, you're making the right choice, and we're going to help reduce that risk for you going forward. So a couple data points related to the sales end of this, the sales side of this continuum. First of all, some data from a study we did on sales enablement that show that best-in-class are way more likely to rank high effectiveness in terms of sales-led nurturing, using content heavily in the sales conversations to move buyers forward in that stage. There's a notion where, and I often collaborate with my sales counterpart in research. There's a notion that marketing has gotten more like sales, more metrics driven, more revenue driven. We're starting to think about things like quota of marketing qualified leads that we're putting into the sales pipeline. We're starting to think about the value of the marketing funnel and calculating that and doing kind of revenue forecasting based on the value of leads at various stages in our marketing funnel. And then likewise, sales is getting more like marketing, right? They're using content to continue that conversation. They're kind of becoming mini marketers in many cases. So we see that very strongly and come out in the data. And then to kind of round that out, we see really strong evidence of the strong working relationship between marketing and sales from a content perspective. So marketing engaging with sales around the content, marketing getting visibility into the content that not only that sales is using, but the content that sales is finding effective and is actually being effective in terms of closing business. So actually tracking use and the holy grail here, speaking Monty Python, is to ultimately be able to kind of track that content to revenue, whether it's in the marketing side of that funnel or in the sales side of that funnel. So there is some work to do around content analytics. So you can see, first of all, the clear pattern best in class. And this is just a sample, so we see, again, really strong evidence, best in class, more likely to be not just tracking content, but tracking content from a variety of perspectives. So tracking utilization, tracking conversion, and starting to get more granular in the way that they're tracking that conversion and that utilization. So starting to look at that from the perspective of how is this content performing in this situation? Again, how is this content being effective in answering the buyer's question at that moment? Starting to bring that back. Obviously, this gets harder to do from a sales perspective because we have kind of less control over the asset and how it's used and being able to track it as opposed to kind of being on our marketing automation system, being able to roll up this data quite nicely. And one of the challenges that we have with this, I think, is an attribution model challenge. So we still see a lot of folks that have a last touch attribution. I think it's a great start. It's certainly better than nothing, but we see in our data it takes an average of 8 to 10 marketing-driven touches to progress a lead from the top of the funnel to be a closed won opportunity. So if we're thinking about content in terms of aligning it to the buyer's journey and aligning where those 8 to 10 touches are taking place, we really need to know what content is being effective at each of these moments. So we have to kind of evolve and get a little more sophisticated with the attribution model that we're using in order to be able to do that, because last touch isn't going to kind of show you the larger picture. So I'm going to conclude with a few recommendations and final thoughts here. First, consider your buyer's information needs. Consider the critical question that they have at each of these stages, and then think about how your content is answering that question. And so I think this is a process that you can use right alongside some of the other methodologies that are out there for kind of doing content audits or building your content marketing strategy. I think it is consistent with those, so I don't think it's something that you have to, pick one or the other. I think you can use this alongside and just have that as an overlay, thinking about what is my buyer's question here and how is this content going to help move them forward, not just entertain them, not just look beautiful, but actually educate them and start to create a bias in your buyer's mind for the differentiators that are in your products, right? And that's really how we're going to kind of create this unfair advantage for sales, so that at that 57% way through the buyer's journey, those buyers show up, and they've been predisposed to the kinds of products and solutions and content that we have for them. So that really goes to the second point. Make the content more than clever. It needs to have utility, and it needs to answer these key questions. Certainly extend the conversation through sales and think about that last mile. Think about how sales is going to pick up the context of the conversation that you've had with the buyer and how to enable them and support them with the next step along the way. So it starts to really feed into sales enablement, really starts to feed into not just the content, but the how you teach sales to use that content and to continue that conversation effectively. And hopefully if we do that, we'll have less of, oh, hi, I noticed that you just downloaded whatever. And then finally, to my last point, measure the impact of this based on this model, right? So think about your content analytics from the context of the buyer's journey and the context of how effectively it's performing at each of those. So that is all I have. I will say that there's a number of research documents available at aberdeen.com, both in the content marketing and general marketing space, as well as across our 17 different research practices that may be applicable in your particular industry. It's all freely available through registration. So we've unlocked our research. It's pretty disruptive from a research perspective to kind of have this level of high quality, data-driven research available, at no cost at all. So come in, become a member of the Aberdeen research community as a reader, and check out some of the stuff that's on there. And I will be here throughout the rest of the day and into tomorrow. I think I'm on one of the tables during lunch, so hope to continue the conversation with you all during the rest of the show. Thank you very much.